This episode of The Rookie Hunter is sponsored by North Arm Knives. North Arm Knives are handcrafted and sold directly through a father and son team right here in British Columbia. Choose from a selection of outdoor knives, kitchen knives, and their brand new folding knife from northarmknives.com. They ship internationally and guarantee all their work. Callie and I use their products and give them our stamp of approval. Go to northarmknives.com. Hey guys, welcome to episode 55 of Rookie Hunter. Today on the show we have Jesse Zeman from the BC Wildlife Federation. That name sounds familiar. This is his third time on the show, and we're always happy to have him back in here. As you might guess, we're talking about the state of fish and wildlife in British Columbia, and he's the one that's really responsible for opening up mine and Callie's eyes to the state of things here in the province. So this is a BC heavy episode, but you can apply the themes to wherever you are in North America or around the globe, and just use it as a little bit of inspiration to get more involved in the community and represent what we do well. So if you guys want to support the show, you can head over to the website, which is therookieHunter.com. Click on the old store tab there and get yourself a tee. Those can be shipped around the globe, so you don't have to be in Canada to get one of those. You can always go over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Make sure you also subscribe to the show, and make sure you tell your friends and family to check out the show as well. Our two brews of choice for this episode was California Common from Fieldhouse Brewing in Doppelbach. I think that's how you say it, from Red Collar Brewing Co. So you guys know what to do. Sit back, relax, crack a cold beer, and enjoy episode 55 with Jesse Zeman.
Second time? Third time?
Yeah. Number three. Jesse, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
One more, and it's the, I guess, the golden jacket?
No, two more.
I
think you got to make it 5 times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
The green jacket.
The green jacket.
I'm going to go to Value Village and find you one.
Perfect. So, I don't think we need to do an introduction. You've been on enough, and we're always talking about you on here anyways. So, what's new and exciting? That's a loaded question right there.
Yeah. What's new and exciting? Well, we were just talking off air a little bit about the mule deer project. So that is coming to fruition. We've got enough money. So this is going to be kind of a multi-region project in BC. And what we're looking to do this year anyways is collar 90 to 100 mule deer does pretty quick here, probably in March. We're looking to pick up 2 PhD students, one through Adam Ford's lab at UBCO, and then one through Sophie's lab at University of Idaho.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We're in the process of raising more money to get that done, and so we want to collar does this winter. Next fall, what we'd like to do is collar some fawns, pending funding, and we're going to have 4 study areas. So one will be in the East Kootenays, 2 will be in the Okanagan, so one will be in the Gilpin grasslands, which is Grand Forks. Been kind of a sore spot for mule deer for probably 60 or 70 or more years.
Oh, wow.
And then south of Peachland and Summerland there, where we've had that fire. And then the other one will be in Elephant Hill, which is where that fire was, west of Kamloops, a big fire. So those are kind of our study areas. So we'll look at collaring muley does, hopefully fawns, and then look at the vegetation piece, and then a whole bunch of camera trapping. So we'll probably have about 30 trail cameras in each area to follow the does around through the year. So we'll need a whole bunch of volunteer effort to make that happen. And then we'll be looking at kind of what the plant community does over time from the fires, and also what the predator-prey community looks like. So, you know, some areas are going to have a lot of white-tailed deer, some are going to have a lot of cougars, wolves, that sort of thing, and then try to get a handle on what's happening in these different deer populations.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We've got lots of guys listening from BC. If they want to get involved, volunteer, how do they?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, I'll be the person to contact, I guess, and we'll be putting something out on our website pretty quick here to talk about the project, and then looking for donations and that sort of thing. And you guys know, BC is pretty underfunded, so you know, we've got, I think, 50-something thousand confirmed through club donations so far, and we'll be looking for more donations to keep this project moving forward. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Nice. What's the history on collaring mule deer in BC? Is this like a new kind of effort to push that.
Yeah, looking at all the pieces. So the East Kootenays, they have a number of does collared, but that study was looking more at sources of mortality. So kind of what's the survival rate of these does and what's killing them. This project is going to look more at the big picture. So we're looking at the different types of landscapes. So a lot of it is going to be fire versus non-fire. And you guys already know what happens after you have a fire to mule deer.
Yeah.
So, we're obviously kind of trying to look at those different factors to see, really at the end of all this, how do you grow mule deer?
Right.
And so, a lot of the history, what we know with our trees, and from Dr. Lori Daniel, she's at UBC, she's a tree ecologist, is, we used to have fire on this landscape. And we assume that fire is good for mule deer. And so, with this Elephant Hill fire, and then even that fire by Peachland this year, that'll be the question is what's holding deer back in some areas and what's happening in areas where deer populations are growing.
Right. Very cool.
You guys were there for Dr. Hebelwhite's talk at UBCO, and he talked about that. And, I think at the end of his presentation, he summed it all up in a slide, and it said habitat, habitat, habitat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was cool that mule deer are very rugged animals, but they're also very fragile, like environmentally, depending on, winters and food and all. It's totally... And I also didn't know that they fed more on wildflowers than browse.
Right.
So those were kind of my two big learnings from that one that I thought were interesting.
Yeah, and that's what, when you talk to hunters, not all hunters, but a lot of hunters, what do deer eat? Well, they eat brush.
Right.
It's like, well, what kind of brush do they eat? Right?
Those ones over there.
Yeah, and usually there's not a really good response to that.
Yeah.
And then you see that research where they're saying, actually, no, it's wildflowers and forbs in the springtime and the summer. And that kind of, now you really have to think about how all this works. Because, to have those forbs and wildflowers, now you need an open canopy.
Yep.
And, we went and talked to Hebelwhite about a lot of these plants that I think people assume that mule deer live on 12 months a year. He's saying that stuff's like cardboard.
Right.
The reason they're eating that right now is because the stuff that they want is buried under 1.5 feet of snow.
Right.
And they aren't going to spend all day to dig it, and it's probably already frozen off and knocked all the nutrition out of it.
Right.
So I think, for a lot of hunters, what they have in mind for ideal mule deer food is food that mule deer only eat when things are less than ideal.
Right. Yeah. No, that's super interesting. That was a great presentation for sure. Does he do much of that, like touring around, or is this sort of just like a one-off thing he did up here?
Yeah, I'm hoping that he's going to come back actually to the BC Wildlife Federation convention, which is in Kamloops in April this year. I'm hoping to get him to talk about all of his elk work. He's done a bunch of elk work in the Ahatinda, which is just outside of Jasper in Alberta, and down in the Bitterroot. He's done a pile of work down in Montana. So he does do quite a bit of it, but he's super, super, super high demand type guy. Like, it took me 3 years to get him up here. He did a presentation at University of Wyoming, and there's a really neat mule deer project there too, the Wyoming Migration Project. I don't know if you guys have checked it out.
No.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so it's Dr. Matt Kaufman. He's the guy, and you can check out his website. But they've shown these super long migrations for their elk and deer, and as a result of this work, they've been able to identify the pinch points so that they can buy conservation land to ensure that the deer can move.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
He talked about that in his presentation with the maps and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why it sounds familiar.
Yeah, and they've found some really kind of interesting effects from things like oil and gas and kind of industrial and resource extraction that, we all probably intuitively think is happening, but we don't have any science behind us. So, that's where there's a huge value in science. It's like, hey, if you're going to put oil and gas here's the impact on mule deer. So maybe there's a better way to do this.
Yeah, you can see it right in front of your face. Yeah.
But we all, and even in Kelowna, especially now that we have town deer living in people's backyards, they're going, well, there's deer everywhere and people don't have an impact. And it's like, well, there might be a lot in town, but out in the wilderness, there doesn't seem to be as many as there once were. So, how does all this work?
It's funny because, I live kind of up near the park area, and there's constantly development happening up there, right? And like 3 or 4 years ago, before we got into hunting. I never really thought about it at all. I was looking at it like, oh, Kelowna's getting bigger. This is great. The economy is doing good. My house price is going to go up. And then now there's supposed to be a highway that they're putting to connect kind of Crawford Estates with the Upper Mission. And I mean, for listeners that aren't in Kelowna, I apologize, but essentially that road is going right around some winter range there too, and it's just we keep eating away at it. So now I have a totally different perspective. I almost don't want that road to go in, right? Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah, it's NBC especially because we always talk about winter range being one of the limiting factors for wildlife, and so wildlife likes to hang out on south and west facing slopes, fir ridges. So when we talk about competition, well, where do people like to build highways? South and west facing slopes, because that gets more sun, which means you don't have to worry about snow and ice nearly as much. Highways eat a lot of critters.
Yeah.
Right. So, same with houses. They like them on that aspect as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of competition there.
I don't think we've discussed this with you, but it seems to be a common theme, at least in the Okanagan. So like the contrast, mule deer numbers that we saw last year as far as bucks go to this year. Went from like seeing them all over the place. This year we saw one basically, and that one's in my freezer now.
Yeah.
But we could basically last year was like take your pick. Did you find that this year as well? And do you think there's certain factors involved with that, or?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, so, with your yearling bucks, your 2 points, I mean, really you're looking at last year's survival. And so if you had a bad winter or a bad summer or whatever, like what Mark showed in his presentation is heavy doe throws heavy fawn, which has higher survival rate.
Right.
So if you impact that flow at any point, then you are going to end up with fewer yearling bucks, because that fawn that will be born this June and the following June will be a yearling buck.
Right.
So that could be part of it. I don't know. But if we had collars out like they do in the rest of the world, we would know it's coming down the pipe. The one thing that we did notice, and I didn't get out nearly as much as you guys or most other people this year, just because life got in the way.
Yeah.
But we did, where we found deer, because it was such a dry summer, where we found critters is not where you would normally expect to find them.
Right.
Like they were definitely a lot of north facing aspects.
Oh, okay.
And even the guys that got elk this year got elk in very, I would say heavily hunted areas, but non-traditional areas for elk.
Interesting.
Just because a lot of the spots that they normally hit in September and October were pretty burnt off. And so they were looking for other places to find food.
Yeah, that's why I'm kind of anxious to see what this next season is going to bring, because they might still be out there somewhere, but maybe they were just weren't where we were expecting to see them. So.
Yeah, and we got a lot of snow this winter too. Like all these factors play into it, and that's where places like Idaho. I mean, they know what's coming down the pipe. They're using NASA,
it's crazy,
satellites to predict that.
Yeah,
and that's where we're so far behind the curve, right? And so it really comes down to everybody talks about hunting regulations, but the ones that we really are concerned with are the fawns. It's like, how do we make sure those things survive?
Right.
And if we can take care of them, then there will be lots of bucks, right? Outside of that, I mean, in terms of, on our trail cameras, we saw a ton of whitetail bucks. Like one of our trail cameras, I think we still have like 8 different whitetail bucks on it, like regularly. But in terms of
where was that camera?
Not too far from here. But it's hard to say. We had a few muley bucks where we normally have muley bucks, and I'm just not in touch. And then other places, like, I mean, this burn is well past its best before date.
For sure.
I mean, we started to see that go down in 2012, which is about 8 years after the burn. It started to slide, and pretty quickly.
Right.
And so, that's not going to get better. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And with the way the habitat is changing up there now, you are favoring whitetail deer,
right?
And you are seeing a lot more cougars.
Yeah,
and so
definitely.
As habitat changes, so do the species that live there. So the prognosis for that part of the world, unless we have another fire, just really isn't good,
right?
Compared to your status quo, compared to what you're used to.
Yeah, it's interesting because Kel and I we're going into our 5th season now. So our scope is very small, you know what I mean? So we're seeing the impacts and the changes, but it's hard for us to see kind of the big picture and how things sort of, come in and out and change over time and that. So, we see a big difference over 1 year. We're kind of left scratching our heads, but I think guys have probably seen these trends come and go, and there's different reasons for it.
Yeah.
But you can't just go from, make a decision on what the problem was over a 1 year period because there's so many factors that can be involved with it.
Yeah, it's all, it's about the test of time. I mean, with the winter severity thing, I mean, that's a huge issue. And if you have a bad winter, things are going to get knocked back. But the neat thing with mule deer and whitetail is that they respond really quickly. So if you, if you have 2 or 3 really good years after that, then you're going to be looking around going, well, there's 4-point bucks everywhere, just because supply outgrew hunter demand in that case.
Right.
But, even talking with Dylan the other night, he said, we've got this spot and they hunt over in the Christian Valley, which is, one of the most popular spots probably in BC.
Right.
He said, I'm going to my spot that I've always hunted where I've probably got like 20 deer over the years. He's like, and I'm driving, I'm going, man, like my spot, I should have been really close. I should be close to my spot. Like, where is it? He said, he's like out in a moonscape.
Oh.
He looks on his GPS and it's like your blind's back here, whatever, 70 meters. And it's like been completely nuked by logging.
Oh, wow.
Right? So this is a spot that he's hunted for like 20 years.
Jeez.
And harvested a ton of deer, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
So,
That's a similar story to I was listening to Rinello's podcast, and they got a cabin up in Alaska or something. But they were considering like selling it because this logging company's coming in and taking all their land away, and he's like, well, do we sell it because we can't even get any money for it now, and it's just put him in a bad situation.
Yep.
But, same thing.
Yep. No, and that's more about, and so a lot of these issues, like when you really step back, that's about how you manage the land, right? And that's what this whole public land fight is about in the United States, and that's where in BC we're kind of letting the world happen to us. Like we don't have a plan for this stuff. We don't have a plan to take care of Okanagan Mountain Park, to make sure that it's productive, that goat and sheep and everything you're doing really well. There's no plan for that. So, over time it's just going to slowly regress back to kind of what it was, and the hunting is just not going to be as good as it was.
Right.
Yeah, the Okanagan Mountain Park, a couple guys put some sheep in there 30 years ago or whenever, and we kind of just, for people that don't know the history, you just think, oh, well, there's always been sheep in there.
Yeah. Historically, they would have been contiguous, and I think there were a few, but they did the transplant. Wild Sheep Society did a transplant, and the sheep took off. But now, again, I think their lambing rate's gone down. It's really quite low, and I think you'll probably see the same thing with the mountain goat. The mountain goat population before that fire, a lot of times they'd only see 8 or 10 goats when they flew it, and it ballooned to like 85 or 90, which it grew faster than what most ecologists think mountain goats can actually grow at. Like there's a lot of literature that says, they're pretty slow growing and slow to colonize. And like that population was experiencing double-digit growth, which is unheard of for mountain goats.
Wow.
But they're the same. Sheep are the same, mule deer are the same. They need to be able to see what's coming at them. If they don't, they're going to get eaten. And so, it's not just mule deer. Like it's, this change in habitat's going to be hard on mule deer. It's going to be hard on sheep. It's going to be hard on goats. It's going to be hard on elk. It's not going to be hard on white-tailed deer.
Right.
Because they're getting back to their roots. I mean, that's what they evolved in. They like the thick stuff.
That's the one thing we noticed this year was more whitetails on our trail cam, where there was previous years there was a lot more mule deer in there. So it's
yeah, that makes sense.
It's interesting to watch, man.
Yeah, big changes.
We should probably write this shit down. You and I make a bit of a journal, so then you can look back 20 years from now and be like, okay, this is what happened. And
I think most hunters and fishermen do, right? They always got their journal. I just find it's tough, like when you're counting for a backpack hunt, like pound, like weight, or even like when you're going fishing, man, you don't want one more thing to do in the little boat. Like,
I
don't know. It's worth it, I think, at the end of the day, but it's just one more thing to do.
That's where the podcast comes in handy, I guess.
There you go.
Yeah.
Some of it is predictable, right? I mean, like the guys who are like keen mule deer guys, with mule deer, you want a place where there's good food, where they can see, and, where there's probably not super high hunter pressure, high road densities, right? Those tend to be productive places for mule deer. So, you look at where there were fires in the last 5 years and you go, if it's a big enough fire, it's probably a pretty good spot to go.
Right.
Like it's
true enough.
pretty predictable.
Right.
So
You mentioned Dylan. I'm assuming you meant Dylan Ayers from Eat Wild. We had him in here. When was that? November?
Yeah, maybe just before.
We finally connected with him. You guys did something on the coast just recently here. Tell us a bit about what that was.
yeah, so we've been talking a long time about trying to collaborate a little bit more and talking about what you guys were doing. I mentioned to Dylan as well, and kind of building a bigger, better community around hunting, especially with younger people. And so we put together this night called Beers for Wild Things, and it's at the Legion in downtown Vancouver.
I
And
can get behind that.
it was awesome. So
Yeah.
just had a pile of people, a super diverse crowd, and just talked about the issues and the changes in natural resource management. And a lot of the people, Dylan's been a huge advocate for hunting and bringing all these people that come in who are similar to your guys' story.
Yep.
Even more so because they live in Vancouver, so they're really not exposed to wildlife. He brings them in, brand new hunters. They want to go and learn and see and do and understand. And so that was kind of the crowd. So it was awesome.
Cool.
And so now we have a bunch more advocates who are going to go see their MLAs, their elected officials. And, there's one young guy, Alex, there, who's already written an op-ed, a letter to the editor, which I think was in the Vancouver Sun, which is one of the biggest papers in the province. So he's taking it head on and
That's awesome.
doing
We need
it.
more of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
we had, Nature Trust of BC was there. Ducks Unlimited was there.
Oh, cool.
Backcountry Hunters and Anglers were there.
Great.
Just a whole, guys from Reliable Gun were there as well. So just, kind of getting this community, and it was a great conversation.
Nice. We got to do something like that here.
We were just talking before you got here, Jesse, is like, we got to have some, event that we do 2-3 times a year that's sort of open to anybody, not just hunters to come out, because it's another thing that we were talking about too before we started recording, is that we're sort of just preaching to the choir. Even with this podcast, we're not really reaching the folks that we want to reach. So sometimes it's not really worth, what we're getting into sometimes, because everybody that's listening is going to agree with what we're going to say anyways. But if we can do some sort of events that are open to anybody at, say, one of the local pubs around here, and get wild game involved and get people trying this stuff. And, if you look at bears, people are still under the assumption that it's something you don't eat. If we can get people to eat that, enjoy it, it'll start to change some people's minds, I think. So.
Yeah. Maybe we'll ask Mountain Equipment Co-op if they want to sponsor it.
Yeah.
We got one in Kelowna.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. No,
Put
that's...
out a booth in front of the door.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're
Black
into
Bear.
that stuff.
Yeah. Black Bear, pulled black bear pork sandwiches or whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
Sort of say we were like, if we get a panel of people from every sort of background and opinion,
Yes.
and get all of us to talk on a stage, and we could record the thing and put something out like that.
Yep.
Because if it's just a group of hunters up there talking, again, it's that same preaching to the choir thing. And, but if you can have a good conversation with a bunch of people with different backgrounds, I think that's where you start to change people's minds a little bit.
And you got an awesome
And they can
idea.
make their own opinions based on what was said and that, right? So
Yeah.
some people, you're never going to change their mind, and that's fine if that's the way it is, but you might as well try and inform people the best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, so that, before we started recording, that was a bit of the, the rant today.
Yeah.
It's like with this Grizzly Bear stuff, and, I've done a bunch of interviews around this whole conservation officer service, and people are telling the media that conservation officers are trophy hunters and they become COs just so that they don't have to buy a license so they can
that
kill.
bothered me.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
it bothered people who are not part of the hunting community. Like, I had ENGOs, like environmental NGOs, who are not opposed to hunting, but are not, hunting organizations call and say, what is this? Like, what's going on? And so, I think, for hunters with all these issues, I think, the message is, if you have spare time, which a lot of hunters have apparently, because you look on social media and they're busy talking to each other. But if you have spare time, there's people that you want to convince that hunting is okay. And when we look at the science around social support for hunting, most of the non-hunting public actually support hunting.
Yep.
Most of them are behind what you do. There's shades of gray.
Right.
You know, they aren't going to like things probably like baiting as much. And they probably aren't going to like things like hunting predators as much.
Right.
And they get kind of confused when they hear that a sheep tag went for 450,000 US. But
Right. And what does it do, right? So so for hunters, you have to tell your story. But the people you're trying to convince about the benefits of hunting and conservation are the public and your elected officials. You know, don't try to convince another hunter because they already know that, so you're wasting your breath.
Yeah.
And don't try to convince an anti-hunter because you're wasting your breath on them. They don't want to know about it.
yeah, you're never going to convince them.
No.
No.
And you might in your circle, like if you have a friend who's not a hunter but is, you know, not really a hunting supporter, you might be able to convince them. But on social media, you're not going to go onto an anti-hunting website and convince anybody. And you're probably not going to feel all that great after it's done.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like if you want to drive positive change, the people that you need to convince that hunting is great for wildlife and great for, you know, society at large are the public and the politicians. Those are the people. So I wouldn't waste my time with anybody else.
Right.
You know, that's who I would focus on.
Yeah.
And you don't win those, you know, I mean, you're not going to win that on Facebook. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's the worst place to do it.
Just to touch on that CO article again, I don't know if you guys have read it, but there's a book, Randy Nelson. He's been a CO for, I think he was a CO for like 30 years or longer, but based in BC for a long time. And his book's called Poachers, Polluters, and Politics. And it's kind of his whole like biography of his experiences in that career. And I've learned a lot about COs and have a whole new respect for them after reading that book.
Yeah.
Like they're putting their lives in danger a lot of times, right? Driving around these roads, people with guns in their trucks, and they're actually poachers in a lot of cases. Like they're getting rocks thrown at them when they're trying to pull nets out of rivers. And, yeah, it's there's a lot of intense stories in there. So, I mean, I don't know. I felt like that article was kind of going after them for the correlation that they might be hunters, but it wasn't the fact that, you know, maybe they just love nature and hunters also love nature. So they're kind of, there's a middle ground there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, even a bunch of the reporters, like were, you know, the other reporters were sending me stuff like, you know, it's like, so, okay. So, you know, in the latest news, we're no longer hiring reporters who can read or write because we don't want there to be a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, it makes no sense. But the part that people don't get, and the part that people don't get about hunting is this whole notion of how can you care about something so much if you kill it? And that's what we have to help people understand because they don't get that.
Yeah. Man.
It's a hard thing to explain though, too. That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but you can't, I feel like you have to be authentic in the way that you talk to people.
Yeah.
Like you can't be like, oh, you know, but let's just not talk about the death part.
Right.
But you have to just be authentic, like be yourself. Like this is how I see hunting and this is why we do it. And, you know, if you think less of me, that's okay. The ironic thing about this is on the Grizzly Bear front, like, yeah, I got all kinds of hate mail and, you know, glad you killers are out of the woods and, you know, few death threats. And, but the funny thing is in our network, my wife and I, our friends know that I've hunted grizzly bears. And a lot of like, even one of our friends who was a vegetarian for a time tried grizzly bear pepperoni. It's not an issue.
Right.
They don't have a problem with.
Well,
the way
they
that we hunt
respect
grizzly
you
bears.
guys and the what you guys do, right? Like, because they know you personally, but
Right.
yeah.
So if we look at this, and there's 110,000 hunters in BC, and they all have who knows how many friends. If they're on social media, 100, 200 friends. I mean, as long as you act like a human being, and come across not like, you know, if you don't like hunting up yours, it's my right.
Yeah.
Then chances are people will support you.
Right.
Like people are hunting curious, but if you come across, you know, as the way some of these angry old white guys come across, right? Then you're gonna turn people off of hunting.
Yeah. Well, you were on a number of radio shows.
Yeah.
After this grizzly bear thing,
Was
happened.
it the one you did in Alberta? I think that's.
I don't know. There's one that you had a tough time.
It was on Victoria. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say you had a tough time. I think
I did
great.
have a tough time.
No,
I think you did a great job on that one, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, yeah. I mean, you be yourself, but this
fucking
car
horn
alarm is going off. It's just killing me. But yeah, so the guy said, you know, he was going off about all this stuff and saying, like, why do you have to kill things? And eventually he said, you know, I eat hamburgers, but, you know, and then he flipped the question on you and he said, like, what gives you the moral right to kill an animal that's living its life out there in the wild? Or is it immoral? And you kind of said, well, yeah, because like what you do with that animal at the end of the day and the context around that, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but it's kind of the same. Like you get two guys eating hamburgers. One of them's a beef burger that he didn't kill, and the other guy killed it himself. Like who's more moral in the end of the day? I kind of think the hunter is.
Yeah.
If he respected that animal and like wanted to get it out of that respect. I'm not knocking people that don't hunt, but I mean, I just wish that people that didn't, like, you got to think about where your food comes from at the end of the day.
Somebody killed it.
Yeah.
Came from somewhere.
Yeah, I wasn't, you know, I've never had that question posed in that way.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think there's a bigger moral debate about that, about where your food comes from and understanding that. And I think that, you know, we're talking to hunters, and I think that hunters probably stand on the high ground, but I don't think it means that people are bad who don't eat wild game.
For sure.
You just have to consider what's on your plate.
Yeah.
It's like even things like quinoa, there are externalities to buying quinoa.
Yeah.
You know, there are people that used to be able to afford stuff like that no longer can.
Yeah.
So everything you do has an impact. And I think, you know, every choice that you make, you know, I like at grizzly bear hunting too. And it's like every day I make choices, and I know that some of them aren't sustainable and some of them probably aren't great for the environment.
Right.
When I go out and hunt grizzly bears and shoot one, you know, is it sustainable? Yes. Do we eat it? Yes. So you can feel pretty good about that. I wasn't ready for it at the time, of course.
Yeah.
Because the guy I think he was throwing some stuff like, why can't you just go play in the woods?
Why don't you go play tag?
Yeah, why don't you go play tag in the woods?
Yeah, that's exactly the same.
But he did
exactly the same experience.
But he did come to the point too where he said, you know, I eat hamburgers. And I think that's a conversation that I think hunters and anglers and the non-hunting public need to have. It's like, think about where your meat comes from, and think about when we clear land, and think about other communities and other parts of the world who suffer when you buy cheap food that's imported from where they live.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You have to consider that.
Yeah.
I feel like you got that guy thinking.
Yeah.
Because he, you know, I think his mind was sort of made up, but each time he'd bring up a point, you did a good job of sort of bringing things into perspective for him. And then you almost stopped him in his tracks a few times there. And I think I feel like he was kind of thinking about things a little bit more after you talked to him, which is good.
Yeah. The expectation a lot of times when you talk to reporters is like they're going to get some guy on the other end that's going to just tell them to F off.
They're trying to get
I'm
a rise
doing
out of
whatever
you.
the hell I want.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
You know, that's what they're expecting.
Right.
But I did think it was funny when the guy says, you know, come on, I'm trying not to be biased here. It's like, well, you just told me to go play tag in the woods instead of hunting. I don't feel like you're being unbiased right now.
Yeah.
Well, and you kind of had a family aspect to it too. Like your wife goes out with you, you bring your kids, and like,
yeah.
I mean,
sure.
it's tough for even somebody that's on the biased end to really, if they're truly listening in the conversation, to just, you know, ignore all that.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like hunters need to start filling that space, right? Like that's where, you know, it's not going to be an advocate. Like Steve Rinella has like definitely changed hunting, and his podcast has had a huge influence.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know, one person or two people or five people are not going to change this. It's going to be the hunters who buy the licenses, who are respectful of wildlife, who contribute to conservation, who volunteer their time. Those are the guys that are going to buy your social license.
Yeah.
You know, so guys like Steve can help convey that and help you understand, because it's really hard to like understand why you hunt, because a lot of it is part of our ecology and our evolution. Like it's instinctual. This isn't something that you like program into yourself.
Yeah.
So to understand it is complicated. But for all the people who buy licenses, they're the ones that are going to buy hunter's social license over the long term. It won't be one or two advocates.
Right.
It's just not the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. We talked to Josh Skeens. He's a chef from San Francisco at the Sheep Show.
Cool.
He was kind of at our table for, almost every night down there. And he's got this restaurant down in San Francisco that's like top 50 in the world. And he's been hunting for a long time. mostly birds, he said, but he started getting into big game.
He's about the same amount of time as us. He did it a little bit as a kid and then kind of got back into it because he's tired of all the poor food practices, basically.
So for him, it was a lot about like utilization of the full animal and just like the quality of the food. And he's kind of pushing that. Obviously, you can't use wild game in his restaurant, but he's kind of pushing those concepts in his food. So, he just posted a picture on Instagram there of a duck that was kind of roasted whole, and it even had the head on, but the head was like still, it wasn't plucked or anything. It looked like a fresh duck head, and it was kind of, so I feel like it's cool that he's kind of, that message is coming through with his food that he's serving on a plate in downtown San Francisco. Bringing that to people, right? I mean, that was an actual duck. You're eating a duck.
And that's where I think part of this, the missing component is that people, I think, are, a lot of people now are 3 or 4 generations from the farm. Like a lot of people who originally moved to Canada lived on a farm, and so life and death was a part of your everyday. And I think that's where hunters can play a role. And it's not in like they call it the grip and grin. Like I think that's putting a picture of your kill on your social media without telling the story and showing every part of the hunt. I think you're really doing hunting a disservice because the non-hunters don't understand that. They don't get what that means, what goes into it. That's the difference. But I think if you can show people the process and show them the outcome, i.e., what you eat and how you butcher it, I think that's huge because that will help them put it in their mind that this person does all of this. This is where their meat comes from, and hey, maybe I should consider where mine comes from. I think there's a lot of mileage to be made in that end.
And that's a pretty simple thing to do for most people.
I think for hunters and anglers, like we never did it because we always just took it for granted. It's like this is what we're eating tonight. Why would we take a picture of dinner? Because it's just like having salad. But then as time goes on, you realize that there's all these other people on social media that don't get hunting and don't understand it, but they get food. Right. And when they come over and we have deer steaks or burgers or whatever it is or bear, then they get it. Then it's like, I can appreciate this. So
for sure.
So if you can put that on your social media, I think there's huge value in that.
100%.
The stuff that we've done as far the rabbit was sort of the example that kind of keeps coming up is like a picture of a dead rabbit, me holding it. And then it had it butchered up on a plate, all the different pieces, and then like the meal that came after that. And it's a full, even a small animal like a snowshoe hare is a full day event from bringing it home, cutting it up, and then making a meal out of it. It puts it into perspective for people. I think.
I think that's huge. And the reemergence of storytelling has become huge, right? And so it's weird in the research world, the academic world, it's like, we want you to be logical about this. People don't really buy the logical presentation necessarily. They want to be told the story. And I think if the non-hunting public got everything that goes into a hunting trip, instead of just the picture of the guy that shot the sheep, then there would be far more appreciation, right? When they understand that, hey, you put it on your social media right now, just started training for my trip to northern BC to go sheep hunting, and they start to see what you put into it, then they will appreciate it a lot more.
And as our trip proved, you don't always come back with something either. So you can spend a ton of money on equipment and fuel and
time,
accommodations and time, and spend 10 days
Calories.
Up there. And Kelly lost like 10 pounds while we were out there. And we
I don't have 10 pounds to lose.
We came home with absolutely nothing but good stories and good times. And that guy mentioned, why can't you just go and hike? Well, I do hike every, a couple 100%. Times a week. I'm out there on Saturday, Sunday. We always go out and do some hiking, but I would not just go all the way to the top of BC to do what we did, even though that just ended up being a hiking trip. It's a totally different perspective when you do that. So that's what and I don't blame them for not understanding that either. You would have to experience it for yourself.
And they're being fed a line on the flip side, and so hunters haven't helped themselves in social media either. When you put videos on of stuff that hunters don't even like to see, somebody's going to flag it. There are groups that are watching hunting websites and social media, and they're looking for stuff like that. So don't post it or don't do it. But yeah, I mean, you've totally hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's telling the story, and part of what the narrative is from the flip side is it's all about the kill. The thrill is in the kill, and it's like, okay, when we went through the Grizzly Bear review, it's like, okay, well, is this all about killing? Well, the success rate is like, I think it was 14% or whatever, right? So it's like, well, no, then it's not all about killing. I mean, if hunting was just about killing, then we would be farming bears for people to shoot on their farm. Yeah. That's what we would do, right? So there's a lot more to it that's not being explained, and I think that's where social media, you have to show the trials and tribulations.
Yeah, my success rate last year was 0%.
How many hours do you think?
But I had a blast.
Yeah. It's typically, I think I would have to look it up, but for deer, it's probably around 15%, 10-15% for resident hunters. Yeah, it's not high. I mean, hunting is about an experience. It's not about a kill. Like I said, if hunting was just about killing, people would be farming wildlife.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's what people would do. Yeah. Right. Because then if if the public's motivation is just to kill something, then on the commercial side, then it's to produce something for someone else to kill. I mean, if there was more money in cows that people could shoot, then people would raise cows that people could shoot. Mm-hmm. And we're not doing that. So clearly that is not what's motivating hunters.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. You heard we've sort of mentioned grizzly bears a few times, and you heard the episode that we did, which was just a couple of days after news came out. Anything you want to kind of add to that the whole thing? There's a lot to talk about, but it's...
Yeah. I mean, so, the BC Wildlife Federation put out a paper because, I guess part of it, you want to come from an honest place. So, people are saying, well, so we talk about trophy hunting, right? So trophy hunters do this and they only harvest old males and this and that. It's like, okay, well, is that true? Right? Because on the flip side, we also have the people who are opposed to grizzly bear hunting saying all that hunters select for are these old, large males, and it fills a void in the population and all the rest of that stuff, or it creates a void in the population. It's like, is that true? Okay, let's look at the harvest statistics. Well, no. The mean age of harvest for non-resident hunters is just under 7 years of age for grizzly bears. And 30% of that is female. Mm-hmm. So no, this is not just to shoot old, quote unquote, trophy males.
Right.
People aren't shooting those. I mean, grizzly bears are considered adolescents till they're 6. So if the mean age of harvest is 7, then no, that's not true. Right. So there's a lot of facts and a lot of science. And I think out in the world, in the WWW world, there's a lot of BS.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And there's BS coming in from hunters and there's BS coming in from anti-hunters. And I think that if hunters want to take up the space of legitimacy, then they're going to have to find out what they're doing and not just say things. You can't just say, well, this is what I do and not be able to support it with facts. Right. But I think, so the next thing under that is, obviously this was a political decision. And I think what it speaks to is that hunters are not as powerful as they should be or could be, I guess. Right. And so, we talk about the voting stuff and how there's 110,000 hunters and a whole bunch of people that support them. I think what the government has said is you're not a big enough threat to us.
Right.
That's what they're saying. So then you start peeling that onion and you go, okay, if that's what they're saying, then why?
Right.
And I think it gets back to, we're back talking to each other and fighting with anti-hunters instead of focusing on the people that count.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I think that's the learning out of all of this.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, and the other people are the 80-90%, right? Well, 80.
Yeah, and for a lot of them, the grizzly bear, as an election issue, my read on the post-BC election is that the Lower Mainland's issue was the cost of housing. Mm-hmm. Somebody who makes $100,000 a year can't afford a house down there. Right. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. They'll talk about grizzly bears in the media. That's not a voting issue. And what are people voting on? Are they more concerned that there's salmon left in the Fraser River or that there's 200 grizzly bears being shot?
Or they can't afford to live.
Right. So it's not really a priority. I think what it's come out as is hunters just aren't engaged enough.
Yeah.
Right. And I had, talked to a pile of MLAs afterwards and, they didn't hear from their constituents.
Mm-hmm. Well, the petition that went around to try to get the funding to go back into the, 100% into the Habitat Trust Fund.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it ever got to 10,000.
No. They're still trying to. So we got to put some money into that to get it on social media, and then wrap it up around science a little bit better.
Yeah.
But again, like it's like Heba White says too, habitat isn't sexy. The long game isn't sexy, but it's the game that we have to play.
Right.
Yeah.
So, with the Grizzly Bear stuff, it caught everybody's attention, and everybody, with social media, there's this huge outpouring and downloading of emotions. But it's like, okay, so what did you do?
Mm-hmm.
Whose mind did you try to change?
Yeah.
You didn't try to change anybody's minds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like we should be treating this as an opportunity, but
Yeah. It's huge. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like the learning out of this for everyone, for hunters all over the world is, speak your voice.
Yeah.
Convert the people who you can convert. Talk to the people who don't hunt. Talk to your friends and family. Like, I mean, the 110,000 people, your outreach is like, I don't know, 1.5 million people, probably 2 million people easily in the province of British Columbia. That's half the population.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you convey hunting the way it is, at least from my perspective, and fishing, those people will be your supporters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the fitness and the food aspects are very easy to convert people on.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then Steve Ranella had that podcast where he interviewed Greg Blasevich. He's from Stanford, I think. So he did a bunch of work on where and when non-hunters support hunting. And I think a lot of it focused on this is a highly regulated activity. People eat the meat. I think the environmentalists didn't really care about the money, but it's part of the story. But I think that's, you just have to be authentic. I mean, that, everybody wants to make it sound like this is the best thing in the world. And here is the exact reason why. And it's like, just speak from your heart.
Yeah.
Like convey the passion. And that's the same thing with your MLAs. Like go meet your politician. People want, when I help people prepare for these meetings, they want to know like how many dollars, how many cents, this and that. It's like your politician doesn't care about that.
Yeah.
They have staff that do that.
Right.
What they want to know and what you need to convey is that this is really important to you. It's disappearing and that you expect them to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's
Pretty
all.
simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, with Mike and I, like being new to hunting and kind of a newer, I guess, generation, sometimes I find myself talking about it more than sometimes I think I should not talk about it as much.
Right.
People don't want to hear it all the time, but I mean, I think it's always a good conversation.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a deep conversation, but I don't know, I could be wrong, but it feels like the older generations or the people that kind of grew up with it, took it for granted. They're kind of like, why should I go around talking about it, right? Like, I'm just going to keep it to myself. And, I know a lot of people don't like it, so I'm not going to talk about it, but that isn't really helping.
Yeah. And some of the older guys are like that. I don't need a social license. I have my hunting license or I have rights. And it's like, well, actually,
there's that side too.
it's actually, you actually don't have rights.
Yeah.
You don't.
That
There's nothing-
80% could take them away pretty quick.
Oh, well, and they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing written. I mean, in BC, we have the right to hunt and fish, but that legislation says only where it's legal. So if you make it so that it's not legal, well, then guess what? And you don't have any legislation that supports you. Mm-hmm. And, I think when you say to the non-hunting public, well, up yours, I'll do whatever I want. Well, now you've given them the stereotype that they were expecting. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of, I think that's what some of the anti-hunting organizations are trying to play up is that hunters really don't care about wildlife and they really don't care what you think. And I don't think that's either one of those is true.
Mm-hmm. No.
So you take these opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I mean, in inside networks, social media is really impersonal, right?
Yeah.
It's very easy to have blow-ups on social media.
I was going to say, it's like, that's probably the worst place to do it. You can get some things accomplished on there, but if you spend an hour with somebody face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can have 1,000 people that agree with you on a thread.
Yeah. Or
and
disagree.
one person will drag that whole conversation to nothing.
Mm-hmm,
like,
yeah, I feel like the safe place is inside of your own like social media network, like your friends or followers or contacts or whatever. I feel like that's the safe place. I think in the anonymous land, Yeah, it's not good.
No.
Yeah.
It's not a good place to talk about that.
A few years ago, Kelly and I kept it pretty quiet because we were worried about sort of the impact that it might have. And, I was kind of worried about, people would associate that with the business that I operate and sort of, that would impact me negatively. But now we're in my office right now and I've got a mule deer skull up on the wall.
Yeah.
And it starts conversations. People come in here and they ask questions about it. And I tell them the
100%.
whole story behind that thing and why it's up there. It's not just a trophy, it's a memory.
Yep.
And when I'm working, it's right above my computer. And I often just look up there and I think about that day and what it meant to me. And
Yeah.
it's pretty powerful.
Yep.
So rather than just tiptoeing around it and ignoring it, it's best to just put things out in the open like that. And
Yep. Yeah. I don't feel like in our network we don't have those. Certainly in the world we have those issues and get nasty feedback. But that mule deer is people have it in their minds, and non-hunting public have it in their minds that you're going to talk about how great you are and how big your mule deer is, and blah 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 blah. And it's like that's not actually what this is about. And this is why I have this on my wall, and this is what I remember, and here are the important things, and that sort of thing. And that tells a different story, and then they can empathize, and they get what you're saying and what you're doing. So I don't think it's really hard to convert the non-hunting public, because I think it's in all of our evolution and ecology. It's kind of part of who we are. So as long as you're not coming from a place that's like F you, I don't need a social license from you, and these are my rights, and I'll do whatever the hell I want. You're probably gonna be okay.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Our buddy Scott there, he had a deer that he just put on his wall that's said it took him 10 years to get a deer like that, a mule deer.
Yeah.
It's just that is news to people, right? Like, oh, I thought you just go out and you shoot it.
Yeah, totally.
No, it took 10 years to get that.
Totally.
And he's out there a lot.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, people get, this is all part of life. Like, the struggle for everyone is real, and the challenge, that's a big part of the reason why you go hunting is you want to challenge yourself. You want to enjoy the scenery. You want to spend time with your friends, all those sorts of things. And people get that.
Yeah.
And if you have someone who's opposed, but doesn't hate you, then you just ask them to come.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you come fishing? We've taken people hunting before who are, terrified of firearms, terrified of hunting.
Right.
And the next thing you know, they want to go hunting.
Yeah.
Like it unlocks something in them that they were so afraid of. I feel like they're almost like, it's such a weird thing for them to experience. They're almost trying to suppress it, or they're really scared of it. And then you go out and say, here, this is what it's like. Do you want to go try shooting a 22? Do you want to go grouse hunting?
Yeah.
And then the next thing you know, they want to get their license.
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
So
I even had a guy that was vegan that asked me about this.
yeah.
And I told him the whole story, start to finish. And it blew his mind. He loved it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's all it takes, man. It's
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah. It's really interesting. A lot of, there's different degrees of vegans, but some vegans totally get this. Like they choose not to eat meat because they don't like the way that meat is raised.
That's exactly why we're out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they go, I have a cousin who's vegan, and he has no problems with eating grizzly bear, like with us hunting grizzly bears or catching salmon. He has absolutely no issue with that. My old family doctor, same thing. He would come over and he totally gets it. It's like this, I would do this. If I had access to it and the ability to do it, I would do it. I choose not to eat produced meat.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like that's totally. And
We're
just
on
by
the same team.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just by being genuine with the guy and having an authentic conversation, you're able to change their mind.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's everybody's homework, to go have a genuine conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think on social media, if you have a hunting trip, post the whole hunting trip.
Yeah.
Start posting before you leave on it.
Yeah.
Put the pictures of everything you're putting together. Talk about the exercise. Do not put a kill shot on as a standalone picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put your entire hunt on and have a picture of the kill shot if you want. But talk about the entire process. People will get that. People don't understand this, male-dominated, achievement-based kind of outcome, right? And I think that, hunters can change that. And it's the same thing with the cougar hunting. I did an interview with CTV on the cougar hunt after it had all blown up, and they didn't even end up airing it. Obviously, it wasn't controversial enough.
Right.
And he started asking me about the ethics and hounds and that sort of thing. And I said, it was the Prime Minister's wife. I said, well, it's ironic because I looked down on her social media feed and she totally supports seal hunting, which I support as well.
Right.
I'm okay with that. It's sustainable use. I'm totally fine with that. But, it's not a whole lot different. It really isn't. Right. And so I look at this and he says, well, chasing a cougar until it's exhausted. I said, well, that's not really how cougars' ecology works. They evolved around wolves. And so when they hear something bark, they run up a tree. They aren't run till they're exhausted. And I said, and in terms of using dogs, do you have an issue with people that use Labradors to go hunt ducks, or pointers or retrievers to go hunt birds? Well, no.
Is it even possible to hunt a cougar without dogs?
It would be really hard.
You'd be pretty lucky, yeah.
Yeah, I think it happens. I think guys happen into it, but I think it's really hard. But, so when you take these examples, a lot of it is because it's a, charismatic megafauna, charismatic carnivore. But it's like, okay, do you have an issue with people that hunt ducks with dogs? Do you have any people that hunt upland game birds with dogs? Well, no.
Or fish with nets.
Right. I mean, there's a million things, right? And that's the thing. And that was part of we started discussing salmon. I said, there's people that buy their fish from the store. There's people that catch their fish with a net. There's people that catch their fish with a fishing pole. I said, let's talk about two things: sustainability and ethics. What's the most ethical out of those three? We have all kinds of issues with fish stocks that are no longer sustainable, and we're still catching them and people are still buying them in stores. So tell me who's sitting on the high ground here. And then he said, he says, any closing comments? They said, yeah, we're down to 11 caribou in the South Selkirks, and we use houndsmen to shoot and catch cougars in those areas because we know that there's more cougars than there should be.
Right.
And we know that there are no steelhead left in the Thompson. Isn't that what we should be talking about?
Right.
Not one cougar that was shot in northern Alberta where it's sustainable.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
No.
And they didn't air it.
They didn't air any of the interview.
That's too bad.
None of it.
Sounds like you got a good one there.
None of it. They didn't air any of it. So
You had a hat trick.
yeah. So it's interesting. And I don't know that world either, but apparently you have to be more controversial or whatever. But a lot of it, I'm trying, after the interview with the guy from CFAX, it's like, okay, let's, think about what we're doing. It's good because it gives you the opportunity to really consider your life choices.
Yeah.
But I try to wrap it up under sustainability and ethics too. And it's like, when you compare it to everything else that's going on, is this sustainable and is it ethical? And a lot of times hunting comes out above a lot of the other things that we're doing.
Yeah.
It's true.
Very true. Well, we made it through my list. Anything else you want to chat about before we?
I don't know. What's on your guys' radar?
I guess Sheep Show was kind of an eye opener. You see the hunters coming together and just a ton of money.
Yeah.
A ton of money.
Ton of money. It was pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Because
outsider perspective, because Kelly and I are new, you think about these guys, trophy hunters, right? The trophy word. They spend all this money and they go shoot these big rams and stuff like that. But if you look at where that money goes and how it got there and all that kind of stuff, it all makes sense, right? So first of all, we don't have that kind of money. And, the way we want to achieve getting a sheep is different, but that's how those guys want to do it. And they're putting a ton of money back into the system. So we need those guys, right? Just as much as we need everybody else.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So I think it's just a big eye opener and how small of a community is and how everybody supports each other, and pretty cool to see.
Yeah. It doesn't look good in a way, but it does good
From the outside. But yeah, if you brought somebody there and showed them, like, watch this and make up your mind on it.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild to see that kind of money.
Well, there was a couple cases where, something would go up and they'd bid it up to $120,000 US, and then he would win and he'd donate it back. He said, just donate it. So then they'd roll it up again.
130,000.
Yeah, they roll it up again to 130,000, and then that guy donated it back.
Yeah.
So like the entire room, which is like 2,000 people, 2,000 people, is like on their feet cheering now. because they all know that money's going to sheep.
Yeah.
And they're egging each other on. And then it goes to the third guy. And I think he ended up buying it for like 40, 50,000 US, but it took 3 rounds and 2 people donating all that money for nothing.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to see that.
It's definitely, this with the Africa thing and Cecil Line too. That's where I think it does tie back into people's personal social media is it's about this bigger picture around conservation. And a lot of times the focus is not on that bigger picture, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. And even with these premiers draws and all the rest of that stuff, there's always controversy around it. But if you discuss it on the balance of everything that you do, it's probably socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. But if there's a picture of a dead sheep and whatever, $130,000,
it's not going to make sense.
No, to the public and to a lot of hunters.
Yeah, for sure.
They're not going to get that.
No.
Yeah.
So, it's far more about telling your story and everything that goes into it than just wrapping your life up in a kill shot.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And the other one, the BC sheep tag went for 220,000 US, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
And so that money goes back into the Habitat Trust Fund up here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a special committee that decides on the allocation of the funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a good experience.
For sure.
Yeah, no, there's the sheep hunters they're as keen and avid as anyone. A lot of those guys eat, live, sleep, breathe sheep.
Yeah.
For sure.
They love them. I mean, it's a pretty neat species for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And we posted a photo of Mike bailing through the luggage cart on
I
the
saw that.
backpack run. And you were different the next day, man. Like
I think I had a concussion.
you would disappear and then you'd come back and you just like you weren't very talkative. You're kind of like always rubbing your ribs.
Bit sore.
Yeah, I think I might have, it still hurts. I feel like I cracked a rib maybe.
Oh, wow.
And I had a rug burn on the side of my forehead.
That was fun.
That's great. Yeah, the wild sheep, they've got a few burns planned here this spring too,
Nice.
I think.
Yeah.
So, no, they're getting work done on the ground. So that's
For sure.
We met a lot of good people too. We met a lot of the folks from Wild Sheep Society of BC.
Yep.
We met Gray Thornton.
Yeah.
Talked to him for a minute or two. Very enthusiastic guy.
Yeah.
Like we can tell why he's in his position.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, Gray's a super good guy.
Yeah.
What else? One more, I guess maybe one more on the sustainability theme, fish related.
Right.
Mhm.
So Thompson Steelhead, we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
They are forecasting now 145 fish coming in.
Jesus.
Used to be in the thousands.
Yeah.
And so in terms of the Species at Risk Act, which is federal legislation, you have the Species at Risk Act, which is decided on by the cabinet of the federal government. And then there's an independent science body called CSIWIC, who's the one who does like the technical assessment. So like CSIWIC will look at these species and go, okay, is this, does this qualify as an endangered species or endangered population? If it does, then they hand it off to the minister and the government to say, okay, we recommend that you list this as endangered, but it's still the elected official's decision, right? So Thompson Steelhead are going through their CSIWIC assessment right now. And my gut is that it will come back as, yes, these populations are separate from the lower Fraser populations. And yes, they are endangered. And yes, you should list them. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big things that will come down the pipe. So once that comes out, then the federal government has 90 days to respond to that. And when you look at salmonids, which is anything that migrates in and out of the ocean, so all of our salmon, steelhead, the federal government has a long history of saying, no, we're not going to list that fish because it can impact other fisheries. There's all these other extraneous. So, so it's like, why do we create this legislation to take care of endangered species if you're going to decide that, well, guess what? We're not going to do it. So I think that's a big one that'll be hitting the airwaves here probably in the next couple of weeks. And that's one where we can use people's help because you're going to have to push the federal government to list these populations. Right. Because they have a long history of just saying, thanks, but, DFO will take care of this through their integrated fisheries management plan. It's never been good for any of the other salmon that they've talked about. So that's one thing. If people want to get engaged and want to help out, I mean, that's a huge one. And a meeting with their MP just to say, you know, when the report comes out, if it does say that, which I expect it to, just to say, you need to list this. This is your own federal legislation that you're supposed to follow. These things need to be listed and endangered because there's a whole bunch of protection that comes with it. Then that's something that people can do, and that's something people can do right away.
Good to know.
Homework item number 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any other big game species that are next on the list? Grizzly bears have been removed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so did you see the letter to the Globe and Mail? Chris Derrymont wrote a letter. Hunters need to stop shooting things we don't eat.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, you know, and we said that in our grizzly bear consultation paper, you know, we expect other predators to follow.
Right.
Because they're interesting to the public.
Yeah.
And we expect these other groups to exploit that. So, you know, so things that are low hanging fruit on the hunting end are going to be things like cougars, black bears, wolves for sure, trapping.
Yep.
Trapping is not going to be super supported by the public. And then on the fishing side of things, sturgeon and steelhead are going to be at the top of the list. Easy.
Yep. It could be an adventure even going camping in the next 20 years. You'll have 5 cougars waiting outside for you in the morning, a grizzly bear, a couple black bears. Just
well, and that's where hunters need to take this, like you said, Mike, as an opportunity. I mean,
that's kind of what I was getting at. Is should we be prepared to kind of get ahead of these things?
Yeah, 100%. That's people should be meeting with their MLAs about this stuff. You know, that's what that letter to the Globe and Mail was. You know, it's in our evolution not to eat cougars. It's like, well, that's a lie.
Yeah.
Because when you look through all the literature, First Nations have been trapping cougars for a long time.
Right.
And they've been eating them. And so do people. And by the way, cougars can have trichinosis, as can black bears.
Right.
Which is the same as pigs, which is the most consumed meat in the world. So don't tell me it's because they have diseases.
Right.
Because everybody eats pork and it has the same issue. So, you know, this is the way they're going to frame it up. And cougar hunting is harder, but black bear hunting, I mean, is totally, you know, common. People eat it. The public needs to understand that. And I think that's where hunters can help out on their own social media. Put up pictures of hunting black bears and of eating them.
We're hoping for a black bear this year.
We need to get out.
And
I did eat black bear last year, though.
Yeah.
I got some bear sausage given to me.
Yeah.
We're hoping to kind of make a story out of the whole process.
Yeah.
Kind of what the whole theme of this podcast was to document the whole thing and make it clear why we do it and that we do eat it and it's delicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're going to try to get out.
We need to get out. Yeah, we need to get out. We need to just take a couple of days and go.
Yeah.
There's lots of bears behind our place for sure.
Yeah, let us know the days.
You want to come to the Osceola?
Oh, yeah.
17th?
I can't make it, but
you can't? Okay.
No. Yeah, we should be able to make it.
So there should be, so I'll save you 2 tickets. There should be, normally there's bear, black bear, cougar, grizzly bear, beaver.
Nice.
Like there's everything. Like, I mean, everything is on the menu, and it's actually Hans from Bohemian Cafe that does the catering, and he just does a phenomenal job.
Oh, really? Nice. See, I'm going to cross off all the species here.
Beaver.
Yeah, he doesn't like cooking beaver. He always says that's the only one he doesn't like cooking,
really?
just because it's so fatty.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't like cooking beaver, but yeah, we typically have everything else on the menu. So.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm pumped.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well,
and Bree's coming too, my wife.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
I mean, she grew up with it all, but I don't know if she's tried beaver, and I think she has tried cougar.
Yep. It's really good too. Like cougar is like pork, and it is really good.
Yeah, I've heard.
He typically does like sweet and sour cougar, I think is probably a big one.
Nice.
On the cougar end. And it's awesome. Like it is really good. So this just comes back to, you know, you have anti-hunting organizations that want to portray hunters in a certain light. I guess the trick is don't portray yourself in that light.
Yeah.
And portray yourself, you know, show your whole hunt and act like a human when you reply to people who don't hunt or are curious or have a question.
Well, and so we were just talking about an event, right, where we bring wild meat to the table and we let people try it. And the people that are going to this are familiar for the most part. But it'd be nice to even document this.
Oh, yeah.
Bring it to Instagram on our account and like bring it to other people do the same thing.
100%. Yeah.
bring the story out because it's just isolated in that room, right?
Yeah, so this banquet is like it's the annual fundraiser. It's been going on forever. There's probably 250 tickets. It's all the whole hall can hold. It sells out in an evening.
Wow.
They have a meeting in December, and you buy a table of tickets. It's $50 a ticket.
Yep.
You buy a table, and it sells out in like a half hour.
That's awesome.
Like that's how good it is.
There's obviously demand for it.
Yeah, huge demand. So yeah, like an event like that, I think it's a heck of an idea, heck of an opportunity for sure.
Yeah.
Bring the camera.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but Brie and I'll come for sure.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. And and then the other thing is people got to turn their minds to, this whole thing that the public doesn't get is how, if hunters care so much about fish and wildlife, how can they kill it?
Right.
They have to, you have to be able to convey that, because I feel like that's like the missing link in all of this.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's the moral thing. It's that.
Well,
they don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, they just don't get it because they've never like killed an animal, and they don't get how much you care, and they somehow we have to get across that hunters care. We have to convey that, and
For
not
sure.
just in the sense like what the anti-hunters are going to say is they just want to do that so they can kill more stuff.
Right.
That's the way they're going to convey it, so we have to be able to convey it in our own way.
Definitely.
Cool. Jesse, thanks for coming in, man.
Thanks.
Let's do it again
Thanks
soon.
for the beer.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, man.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Cool. Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.